And I thought it might be an idea just to let you know how I got to meet these two. So there's a little bit in the book about that, and it goes exactly like this. Throughout the scorching summer of 1976, while the British pop charts were dominated by acts like Brotherhood of Man and The Real Thing, punk rock was festering in London. For my very small part, I became unwittingly instrumental in creating an ignoble band called Port Dukes, whose lineage traces back at least as far as the Wheelie Pop Festival. This 1971 event was held in a field near Clacton, Essex, England, at a small village called, not surprisingly, Wheelie. Now, can you name some of the famous music festivals and hippie happenings held in big fields of mud at the end of the 1960s? I'm sure you can. Woodstock, Altamont, Isle of Wight, Wheelie. Well, bands that played the Wheelie Pop Festival included Mott the Hoople, Rory Gallagher and the Faces. The headliners were England's finest fine-gone cats, Mark Bolan's Tyrannosaurus Rex in their hippie pre-T-Rex incarnation. Granted, Wheelie wasn't in the same league as the big ones, yet I clearly remember going to Wheelie, not because I was there, mind you. No, actually, Wheelie survives in a recess of my brain simply because that same weekend my dad took me off on a camping holiday to the coastal town of Southwold in Suffolk. We went in his expertly packed bubble car, a little Isetta, which held 2 people. My dad, this 14-year-old pimply boy, the tent, sleeping bags, clothes, camping stove, lamp and food all crumpled into a tiny Isetta, and as it happens, we drove right through Wheelie en route to sunny Southwold. We passed many scummy, barefoot, Afghan coat-wearing, tie-dyed hippies trying to hitch a lift, with not even space to squeeze an errant bottle of patchouli oil into our little carette. We burbled past their outstretched thumbs. But even if Dad had been driving an empty bus, they wouldn't have got a look in. Long-haired layabouts, Dad would shout out the window at them. Perhaps it escapes Dad's notice that his very own son, sitting next to him, was also, at that time, a long-haired layabout. But I had to concede he was fundamentally right. So yes, my older mates all went to Wheelie, and I went to quaint old Southwold-on-Sea, a little coastal town set with gift shops, geriatric retirement homes, and old world tea and scone shops, and a fish and chip museum. Well, plainly not a rock and roll paradise, but why am I telling you this? Because down the road in Wheelie that weekend, the show also featured a band called Gnidralog. This was the pseudo-anagram of Goldring, the surname of identical Yiddish twins Colin and Stuart, whose diminutive stature belied their enormous talent. I didn't know the twins back then, and although they were hip amongst the other progressive bands around at that time, Colin even has a credit on the sleeve of the eponymously titled Yes album, playing recorder. After 2 albums for RCA, Gnidralog disbanded. Drummer Nigel Pegram joined Folky's Steel Eye Span, while the Goldring twins pursued varied careers in acting and music. One of these projects was to record a single with Lieber and Stoller, the writers who penned some classic tunes for Elvis Presley, including Jailhouse Rock. And there perhaps the story should have ended. Some half a decade after Wheelie, the twins were living in Witham, Essex, earning a few bob in covers bands. By now it was 1976, I was 19 and had become friendly with a bloke called Dave Good, that Colin mentioned earlier. He was a local hard man with a Jaguar and disfiguring facial scars to prove it, yet he was always benevolent to me. A bit of a rogue, he opened his own little shop for shifting dodgy gear. Well, what do you sell then, Dave? Well, put it this way, I sell more than I buy. Dave Good promoted some rock gigs at Chelmsford City Football Club, one being the Tom Robinson Band in their early days. Tom was dressed as an overgrown schoolboy and sporting a nice wavy hairdo that my mum might like. This was before 2468 Motorway was a hit. Tom was very, very friendly to me, aiming his onstage banter my way. When I spoke to him afterwards, he proved an extremely affable chap. It wasn't until I heard his follow-up single, Sing If You're Glad to Be Gay, that I thought twice about him. The American stadium rocker, John Cougar Mellencamp, was not a big name then, and when he played the tiny club, only a few people turned up to see this unknown. I was working on the door. Before the band finished playing, Dave Good grabbed the money and dashed out, saying, "Don't tell anyone my address or number." I didn't know them anyway. Don was too wily for that. Well, poor John Cougar sat patiently next to me on the bass cabinet as I explained the absolute lack of money. He was the first American I had ever met. In the heat of the moment, he seemed to forget that a pronoun should come last in a series of conjoined nouns. But me and the band was the opening act of the Glasgow Apollo last night, and we drove all day to play this 2-bit bar, then get ripped off. I felt sorry for him. He was a nice guy and took the news well, unlike some others of his band. Commiserations apart, there was sod all I could do for them, with only my bus fare home in my pocket because I didn't get paid that night either. And never did. Around that time, Dave asked me to play drums for him. Not that there was an option. If Don suggested you played in his group, you played in his group, no argument. Either that, or you risked getting beaten up for saying no. I respectfully accepted. The offer was made to me one rainy Sunday morning as Dave and I walked together past the butcher's shop in the newfangled Whittam shopping precinct. I presumed that the Saturday night hangover my head was sporting was responsible for an unexpected bout of double vision. Two oily, beady-eyed, gnome-like characters with receding hairlines were striding ominously in my direction in perfect step. Surprisingly, Don introduced the Goldring twins with some reverence as the local blokes who'd had a big record deal with a big label. Never was Dave minded to respect anyone, but it's probably because they'd had records out which they'd actually played on. Now, they're both guitarists in Don's band, and living in Whittam now, which was a mite more cosmopolitan than Wheelie, but still not exactly a happening rock and roll epicentre. It never was, and it never will be. At first, I was wary of these curious-looking identical twins. They were foul-mouthed, vociferous, and had obviously seen quite a bit of life, so I also felt that a lot could be learned from them. After all, they were excellent musicians who knew the music business well. They said hello at first, then blanked me, but rekindled their interest when Don told them I was a musician. "He's our new drummer and all," said Dave in his lurching Essex brogue, and the twins eagerly agreed in their high-pitched, squeaky voices. "I'm sure you've made the right decision," one of them said. They looked me up and down. I wasn't the teddy boy look by then, draped jacket, bootlace tie, green lyrics socks, hair brill creamed. I was young and inexperienced. Here was a golden opportunity for them to boast, so the twins proceeded to regale me with their tales of excess. "Yeah, man, our old band was doing well. We already had someone to look after the drums and PA, but we didn't want to travel in the van. So when we got our RCA deal, we splashed out on a brand new Ford Cortina Mark II, Colin intoned. But we couldn't drive it, so we employed someone to drive it for us. As twins sometimes do, they occasionally spoke in unison, or one of them would finish the other one's sentence. Next, Stuart began a sentence. We took on a guitar roadie because he thought it was a bit below us to actually have to tune a guitar, said the other one. And also the band smoked dope continuously, said an indeterminate one of them. I wasn't sure who it was. And then the other one said, we get stoned so we couldn't roll our own joints. So the other one said, we employed a dope roadie, he continued, and that's all he did. He rolled joints as a full-time job, and it cost us a bloody fortune. Looking back, I suppose we should have employed just one chap who could drive, tune a guitar, and roll joints, but we never thought of that at the time. It took about 6 months to tell the twins apart. Initially, the only way to differentiate between them was at gigs, because Stuart played lead guitar while Colin played rhythm. There you go. That's a bit of it. Would you like one more bit? All right, it's a bit later on when I was in the Revillos were playing with the Ramones. I often hear a lot of stories, people will say, oh, the Ramones, you know, oh, wonderful, fantastic. You know, you knew the Ramones, this, that and the other. Must have been great touring with people like that. But the reality is different. A collection of streetwise New Yorkers from the ghettos, the Ramones always seemed an unhappy, miserable, surly bunch. Backstage, they mooched around, whinging that they couldn't get decent hamburgers anywhere. Dee Dee appeared a bit of a loner and was always off his face on some substance or other. Johnny Ramone was miserable. Singer Joey was silent and morose. I had yet to learn that touring can make you just like that. I was still a wide-eyed and relatively innocent and presumed touring was a wheeze. What's the matter with these chaps? Chin up. The only one that seemed okay was drummer Tommy. I was interested to find out how the Ramones records seemed to start with such fury. They came in with such a bang. When I'd recorded stuff, we'd never been able to get that kind of start to a track, so I asked Johnny Ramone, and he told me the trick. Most people count in a song, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then start playing. We count in 8. After 4 beats, I start playing the guitar, then the drums start after 8 beats. We go back to the master tape and cut right through the tape, so the first beat on the first beat of the drums, then splice blank tape at the beginning of it. That way, it all blasts in together. No pre-sound or anything, so it's easy when you know how. Interest in the Rosillos was gathering pace rapidly with a UK tour support slot. The end of tour gigs were looming at a large London theatre called the Rainbow in Finsbury Park. The Ramones realised they had to do something about the Rosillos, who were going down extremely well indeed just before them. They didn't like it. The weekly music paper, New Musical Express, dated January 7th, 1978, featured a centre spread with the Ramones. The journalist left the tape recorder on and printed a private conversation between the Ramones as they hatched a plan to avoid coming on straight after the Rosillos. Brother Johnny suggested Generation X should be drafted in to play after the Rosillos and before the Ramones. Yeah, Generation X are so fucking bad, man. Yeah, they can play on the second on the bill, not the Rosillos. Put the Rosillos bottom of the bill. When that was printed in the music press, the Ramones were even surlier to me after that. I'll give you one more bit. How about this bit? The Rosillos played at Camden Music Machine in London. Beside the stage was the Star Bar, the backstage area for bands, guests, assorted luminaries, liggers and journalists. "Why don't you buy me a drink?" a girl with an American drawl slurred at me as I stood waiting for service near the bar. A peroxide blonde punkette, she wore dark lipstick, a leather miniskirt and a leather jacket, but she wasn't my type. Indeed, she was not very attractive. But as I went to pay for my drink, she blurted, "And buy one from my boyfriend." I suppose I might as well, I thought. "My name's Nancy. Come over and meet my boyfriend," she suggested. "He's standing at the corner all on his own." Reluctantly, I walked over, thinking, what jerk am I going to have to be polite to? She introduced me to Sid Vicious. He was quiet at first, but gradually became animated. There were a lot of stories about Sid and his violence, but I found him to be a bit of a pussycat. We chatted for a while. I can't really remember most of it. It didn't seem important at the time, and it probably wasn't. They both seemed short of cash, and I was surprised considering how famous he was at the time. A few months later, Sid had allegedly stabbed Nancy in New York's Chelsea hotel, and he was dead from a heroin overdose. The heroin was apparently procured for him by, of all people, Anne Beverly, his own drug-addled mother. She eventually killed herself in 1996. Too much junkie business. Back at the music machine that night, I reluctantly bought them another round. Then they joined up with some others, so I ambled away. Later that evening, Nancy stabbed a cigarette out on a photographer who tried to sneak a picture. Sid joined in the affray, and a fight broke out. The realization came much later to me that fame and money frequently do not sit together. Thank you, guys.